Billionaire walked in suddenly. What he saw between his son and the maid's daughter shook him. Richard Sterling's hand froze on the mahogany door handle. Through the crack, pure laughter spilled out, the kind that made your chest ache with its innocence. But this wasn't just any laughter. This was his son's voice, Daniel Corleone Sterling, and Richard hadn't heard that sound in 3 years. The billionaire's breath caught as he pushed the door wider. What he saw made his knees buckle. His 9-year-old heir, the boy groomed since birth to inherit a $40 billion empire, was clinging to the back of a girl with wild, curly dark hair pulled into 2 lopsided pigtails. She crawled across the pristine marble floor on her hands and knees, Daniel riding her like she was a horse, both of them lost in a world Richard had forgotten existed. The girl's worn sneakers squeaked against the floor, her faded jeans a stark contrast to Daniel's tailored clothes, yet neither seemed to notice or care. "Faster, Sophia! The dragon's gaining on us!" Daniel shrieked, his perfectly styled hair falling into his eyes, his starched collar askew. Sophia Dawson, the housemaid's daughter, let out a battle cry that echoed off the vaulted ceilings, her beautiful dark skin glowing with exertion and joy. "Hold tight, Prince. We're almost to the castle." Richard's throat constricted. Prince. When was the last time someone had called his son anything other than Master Daniel? Or young Master Sterling? Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into stories that'll make you laugh, cry, and everything in between. I can already feel this one's going to hit differently. Before we continue with Richard's earth-shattering moment, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you're new here, or even if you've been riding with us for a while, smash that subscribe button, because trust me, you don't want to miss where this story goes. Now, back to Richard, whose world is about to crumble. The mansion fell silent except for their laughter. No tutors calling schedules. No bodyguards checking perimeters. No etiquette coaches correcting posture. Just 2 children, playing like children should. Richard's chest tightened until he could barely breathe. Sophia wore a faded pink t-shirt with holes near the hem, probably a hand-me-down from some older cousin. Her mother, Maria Dawson, earned barely enough to keep them afloat in their tiny apartment across town. This girl had nothing. No trust fund, no inheritance, no private jets or vacation homes scattered across 3 continents. Yet she had given Daniel something Richard's billions never could. Joy. Raw, unfiltered, uncomplicated joy. The realization hit him like a freight train. All those years of carefully orchestrated playdates with other wealthy children. Kids who spoke in practice phrases and played games that felt more like business negotiations. All those exclusive programs where 9-year-olds learned 3 languages and violin before they learned to truly laugh. All those birthday parties and ballrooms with hired entertainers and catered meals that cost more than most families' monthly income. None of it had ever made Daniel laugh like this. Sophia suddenly collapsed in a dramatic heap, pulling Daniel down with her. "We made it," she gasped theatrically. "The kingdom is saved." Daniel rolled onto his back, staring at the crystal chandelier above them, his chest rising and falling rapidly. That was epic. Can we be pirates next? Pirates. Sophia's dark eyes lit up like stars. "I know where the kitchen staff keeps the wooden spoons. We could make swords." Daniel sat up so fast he nearly knocked heads with Sophia. "You're brilliant. We could build a ship out of couch cushions." Richard pressed his back against the hallway wall, his designer suit suddenly feeling like armor. Cold, restrictive, suffocating. When was the last time he called anyone brilliant for such a simple idea? When was the last time he gotten excited about wooden spoons and couch cushions? When was the last time he played with his own son? The truth slammed into him with devastating clarity. He was 42 years old, worth more money than small countries, commanded respect from world leaders and fear from competitors. He could buy islands, fund space missions, topple governments with a few strategic phone calls. But he couldn't make his 9-year-old son laugh. A black girl with holes in her shirt and scuffed sneakers had accomplished in one afternoon what Richard hadn't managed in 9 years of fatherhood. Through the doorway, he watched Sophia help Daniel to his feet, dusting off his expensive clothes with the casual care of a true friend. No calculation in her gesture, no awareness of his net worth, no careful deference to his status. She treated him like what he was, a kid who wanted to play pirates. Master Sterling. Richard spun around, his heart hammering. Maria Dawson stood at the end of the hallway, her cleaning supplies in hand, worry creasing her weathered face. She was 40, maybe younger, the kind of hard living that came with single motherhood and minimum wage jobs age people fast. Her dark skin showed the exhaustion of someone working multiple jobs just to survive. "I'm so sorry, sir. Sophia wasn't supposed to be here today, but the babysitter canceled and I couldn't afford." Maria's voice broke slightly. "I'll get her right now. She knows better than to bother Master Daniel." "Brother Daniel?" Richard looked back through the doorway. Daniel was now explaining something animatedly to Sophia, his hands gesturing wildly, his face more alive than Richard had seen in years. Sophia listened with rapt attention, her head tilted thoughtfully, nodding seriously at whatever crucial pirate strategy he was sharing. "She's not bothering him," Richard heard himself say, though his voice sounded strange and distant. Maria blinked in surprise. "Sir." Richard studied the woman who had quietly cleaned his home for 3 years. She worked double shifts, he knew that much, here in the mornings and an office building downtown in the evenings. She never asked for raises, never complained about the long hours, never brought her personal problems to work. She was invisible in the way that service workers became invisible to people like him. But her daughter wasn't invisible to Daniel. "How long have they been friends?" Richard asked. The question seemed to startle Maria. She glanced toward the room where the children's voices had lowered to conspiratorial whispers. Well, Sophia's been asking about him for weeks. She sees his pictures around the house when I'm cleaning, and she always wondered if he was lonely. Today, when she couldn't stay home alone, I thought maybe, just for an hour." She trailed off, clearly expecting to be fired. Lonely. A 9-year-old girl had looked at photos of his son and wondered if he was lonely, while Richard had been wondering if Daniel was excelling in his advanced mathematics and language studies. The children's laughter erupted again, and this time Richard felt it like a physical blow. 3 years. 3 years since he'd heard Daniel laugh with such abandon. 3 years since the divorce. Catherine had taken her warmth and chaos and left behind only Richard's rigid schedules and impossible standards. 3 years of believing he was giving Daniel everything, when really he'd been giving him nothing at all. Richard's hands trembled as a terrible question formed in his mind, one that would haunt him long after this moment passed. What if the richest man in the city was also the poorest father in the world? Richard remained frozen in the hallway, watching his son's animated face through the crack in the door. When was the last time Daniel had looked at him with such excitement? When was the last time those blue eyes, so much like Catherine's, had lit up in Richard's presence? The answer came like a knife twist. Never. Daniel Corleone Sterling had been born into a world where nannies fed him organic baby food from crystal bowls, where his first words were spoken to private speech therapists, where his first steps were captured by professional photographers. At 9 years old, he could discuss stock portfolios and spoke 3 languages fluently, but he'd never had a best friend. Until today. "Sophia, look," Daniel was saying, pulling something from his pocket. "I have this cool rock I found in the garden. Mrs. Henderson said it might be a geode." Sophia examined the ordinary-looking stone with the seriousness of a gemologist. "It's beautiful. Maybe if we crack it open, there will be crystals inside. Like a treasure." Richard's chest ached. Daniel had shown him that same rock 3 weeks ago during one of their scheduled father-son meetings. 15-minute appointments Richard's assistant blocked out in his calendar between board calls. Richard had barely glanced up from his phone, mumbling something about Daniel not tracking dirt through the house. But Sophia saw treasure where Richard had seen nuisance. "Master Sterling." Maria's voice was barely a whisper. Should I collect Sophia now?" Richard turned to study Maria Dawson more carefully. She was younger than he'd initially thought, maybe 35, with kind eyes that held the weight of too many sleepless nights. Her uniform was impeccable despite being secondhand, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun that probably took precious minutes from her morning routine. She stood with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible in other people's homes. "Tell me about Sophia," Richard said suddenly. Maria's eyes widened in alarm. "Sir, if she's done something wrong." "She hasn't." Richard's voice was rougher than intended. "I want to know about her." The request clearly confused Maria, but she answered carefully. Sophia's. She's a good girl, sir. Smart as a whip. She reads everything she can get her hands on, library books mostly, since we can't afford to buy many. She's always asking questions about everything, wanting to understand how things work. Maria's voice softened with maternal pride. Her teachers say she could go far with the right opportunities. The right opportunities. Richard spent more on Daniel's monthly tutoring than Maria probably made in a year. Yet Sophia possessed something Daniel's expensive education couldn't provide: natural curiosity paired with genuine joy. What about her father? Richard asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. Maria's face tightened. Not in the picture, sir. Never has been. She paused, then added quietly, Sophia asks about him sometimes, but I tell her we're doing just fine on our own. Just fine. Richard knew Maria's financial situation from the background. Checks his security team, ran on all household staff. She worked here 6 days a week, cleaned offices downtown 4 nights a week, and still struggled to make rent on their 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots weren't uncommon. Her idea of just fine would be Richard's definition of poverty. Yet Sophia laughed like she owned the world. Through the doorway, the children had moved on to examining the intricate patterns in the Persian rug, making up elaborate stories about each design. Daniel lay on his stomach beside Sophia, pointing excitedly at what he claimed was a dragon hidden in the weaving. Dad never lets me lay on this rug, Daniel was saying. He says it's worth more than most people's cars. Sophia traced one of the patterns with her finger. That's silly. What good is something pretty if you can't enjoy it? My mama always says the best things in life aren't meant to be looked at from far away. Richard's throat closed. Catherine used to say similar things, back when they were young and stupid and happy. Back when Richard still believed love was more important than stock portfolios and social standing. The memory hit him without warning. Catherine, 6 months pregnant with Daniel, sprawled on the floor of their modest first apartment, painting nursery furniture they couldn't afford to buy new. Her hair was a mess, paint streaked across her cheek, and she was humming off-key to the baby in her belly. Richard had come home from his first major business deal, an acquisition that would eventually launch his empire, expecting to celebrate his success. Instead, he found himself on the floor beside her, adding his own clumsy brushstrokes to a crib that would never match the luxury nursery they'd eventually build. For one perfect evening, they'd been young parents excited about their future, not billionaires protecting their image. When had he stopped getting on the floor? Sophia's mama sounds very wise, Daniel said thoughtfully. She is. She knows everything. How to make the best mac and cheese from a box. How to braid hair even when she's tired from work. How to make me feel better when kids at school say mean things. Sophia's voice carried simple, absolute faith in her mother. Kids at school said mean things. Richard filed that information away, his protective instincts surprisingly sharp. What kind of mean things? About money? About Maria's job? About Sophia's secondhand clothes? Kids say mean things to you too? Daniel asked, and Richard heard something vulnerable in his son's voice. Sophia nodded. Sometimes they say mama, and I don't belong in this neighborhood when I walk here from school. Or they ask why I don't have nice things like them. She shrugged with 9-year-old resilience. But mama says being different isn't being less. She says we have riches they can't see. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Kids at my school don't say mean things to my face. They're too scared of my dad. But I hear them sometimes talking about how I'm weird because I don't know how to just be normal. They think I'm stuck up because I don't understand their jokes or know their games. Richard's heart cracked. Daniel felt like an outsider among children his own age, isolated by the very wealth Richard had worked so hard to build. The private school Richard paid a fortune for had given Daniel academic excellence, but taken away his childhood. And here, with Sophia, Daniel was learning what he'd been missing. If you're feeling this as deeply as I am right now, let me know in the comments. This story is hitting me harder than I expected, and I have a feeling we're just getting started. What do you think Richard should do next? Should he interrupt this precious moment, or let it continue? Your thoughts always make these stories even richer. I wish I could be normal, Daniel continued quietly. I wish I could just play without someone scheduling it or supervising it or turning it into a lesson. You are being normal right now, Sophia said matter-of-factly. With me, you're just Daniel. Not Master Daniel or young Sterling, or any of those fancy names. Just Daniel who likes rocks and wants to be a pirate. Richard watched his son's face transform. Daniel smiled, not the practiced, polite smile he wore for photos and public appearances, but a real smile that reached his eyes and changed his entire expression. That smile was exactly like Catherine's. Catherine. Richard's chest tightened as he thought about his ex-wife. She tried to warn him, tried to tell him he was suffocating their son with expectations and isolation. She'd begged him to ease up on the tutors, to let Daniel attend public school, to let him have friends who didn't come from approved social circles. Richard had dismissed her concerns as naive idealism. Catherine didn't understand the pressures of maintaining their position, the importance of preparing Daniel for the responsibilities he'd inherit. Someone with Richard's wealth and influence had to be careful about who they trusted, who they let close to their family. But watching Daniel now, Richard realized Catherine had understood something he'd been too arrogant to see. Their son didn't need preparation for some distant future of board meetings and charity galas. He needed to be a child first. He needed friends like Sophia, real friends who saw him as a person, not a portfolio. Maria shifted nervously beside him. "Sir, I really should collect Sophia. I don't want to impose on Master Daniel's time. What does Sophia want to be when she grows up?" Richard asked instead of answering. The question clearly surprised Maria. She changes her mind every week. Last month she wanted to be a veterinarian because she loves animals. This week she's decided to be an inventor because she wants to create things that help people. Before that, she wanted to be a teacher like her favorite librarian. Maria smiled despite her nervousness. She has big dreams for such a little girl. Big dreams with limited resources. Sophia's potential was unlimited, but her opportunities weren't. Meanwhile, Daniel had every advantage money could provide, but lacked the very thing Sophia possessed naturally, the ability to dream beyond expectations. What if Richard could give them both what they needed? The thought came from nowhere, dangerous and impossible and absolutely terrifying. But as he watched his son and Sophia planning their next adventure, Richard began to understand that sometimes the most important decisions weren't made in boardrooms. Sometimes they were made in doorways, watching children laugh. The sound of expensive heels clicking against marble echoed through the hallway like gunshots. Richard's blood turned to ice as he recognized the rhythm. Sharp, precise, unforgiving. Victoria Walsh, his business partner, oldest friend, and the woman who'd helped him build Sterling Industries from a small investment firm into a global empire. She was also the most ruthlessly ambitious person he'd ever met, and she was walking straight toward them. "Richard, darling, your assistant said you were—" Victoria's voice cut off abruptly as she rounded the corner and took in the scene. Her perfectly manicured eyebrows shot up as she processed what she was seeing. Richard Sterling, standing in his own hallway like a lurker, while his maid cowered nearby with cleaning supplies. But that wasn't what made Victoria's expression turn deadly cold. Through the open doorway, Daniel's laughter rang out again, followed by Sophia's delighted shriek as they apparently launched into another round of their pirate game. Victoria's ice-blue eyes moved from the children to Maria, taking in every detail of the situation with a calculating precision that made her such a formidable businesswoman. "Well," Victoria said, her voice dropping to the tone she used just before destroying competitors. "This is interesting." Richard felt Maria shrink back against the wall beside him. He could practically feel her terror radiating outward. Victoria Walsh was everything Maria wasn't. Wealthy, powerful, intimidating, and utterly without mercy for anyone she perceived as beneath her station. "Victoria," Richard said carefully, "I wasn't expecting you." Clearly, Victoria stepped closer, her designer dress rustling like a predator's wings. "Margaret said you canceled our 4 o'clock, which never happens." I was concerned. Her gaze flicked toward the children again. "Though now I see you were occupied." The way she said occupied made it sound dirty, shameful. From the room, Sophia's voice carried clearly. "Daniel, you're the best friend I've ever had." Daniel's response was immediate and heartfelt. "You too. I wish we could play together every day." Victoria's lips pursed into a thin line. Richard knew that expression. It was the same one she wore when reviewing contracts for hostile takeovers. "Ma'am," Maria spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just collecting my daughter." She wasn't supposed to be here. No, Victoria interrupted smoothly. She certainly wasn't. She turned to Richard with a smile she reserved for board meetings where she was about to deliver devastating news. Richard, might we have a word? Privately. It wasn't a request. Richard looked at Maria, seeing the fear in her eyes. She knew, just as he did, that this moment would change everything. The pure, innocent joy echoing from the other room was about to be destroyed by the cold reality of his world. Maria, he said quietly, please, give us a moment. Maria nodded quickly and hurried away, probably to wait in the kitchen while her world collapsed around her. Richard watched her go, feeling like he was watching the last moments of something precious and irreplaceable. Victoria waited until Maria was out of earshot, then moved closer to Richard. When she spoke, her voice was low and lethal. Have you completely lost your mind? Victoria, do you have any idea what this looks like? She gestured toward the room where the children were still playing. Daniel Sterling, heir to a $40 billion empire, playing on the floor with the maid's daughter? What do you think would happen if this got out? Richard's jaw tightened. They're children, Victoria. They're playing. They're creating a scandal waiting to happen. Victoria pulled out her phone. Do you remember the Worthington situation last year? One photo of their son at a public playground went viral, and suddenly everyone was questioning whether old money families were out of touch with reality. It took 6 months of careful PR to rebuild their image. The Worthington situation. Richard remembered it vaguely. Some social media storm about wealthy families and privilege that had blown over within weeks. But Victoria collected every slight, every potential threat to their social standing, like ammunition. This is different, Richard said, but even as he spoke, he could hear how weak it sounded. Is it? Victoria's eyes glittered dangerously. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're allowing your son to form inappropriate attachments that could be used against him, against us for years to come. The children's laughter grew louder, and Victoria visibly winced. Think about this logically, Richard. What happens when Daniel starts asking why he can't see his little friend anymore? When he starts questioning why some children have less than others? When does he start developing a social conscience that interferes with business decisions? Victoria stepped closer, her voice becoming more urgent. You've spent 9 years carefully crafting the perfect heir. Don't throw it away for a moment of sentimentality. Richard felt something cold and familiar settling over him. The same ruthless calculation that had built his empire. This was how he'd always operated. Identify threats, eliminate them efficiently, move forward without looking back. But this time, the threat was a 9-year-old girl with holes in her shirt and stars in her eyes. What exactly are you suggesting? He heard himself ask. Victoria's smile turned predatory. Fire the maid. Immediately. Give her a generous severance package to ensure her discretion, but make it clear that any attempt to contact Daniel or maintain this friendship will result in consequences. I know people who can ensure she never works in this city again. The casual cruelty of it took Richard's breath away. Victoria was talking about destroying Maria's life. The life of a woman who worked 2 jobs just to keep her daughter fed, as casually as she might discuss updating software systems. Victoria. I'm not finished. She pulled up something on her phone. I've been doing research since I got here. Maria Dawson, 34, single mother, high school education, no criminal record, but also no significant savings or assets. She's completely dependent on this job, Richard. One word from you, and she'll do whatever you ask. Richard stared at the screen Victoria held out. A complete dossier on Maria's life, compiled in the 15 minutes Victoria had been here. Bank statements, employment history, even Sophia's school records. Victoria had turned a hardworking woman and her innocent daughter into data points to be manipulated. This was who he'd become. This was the world he'd built. From the other room, Sophia's voice rang out. Daniel, when I grow up, I want to build houses for people who don't have them. Big, beautiful houses where they can be happy. Daniel's response made Richard's chest tighten. That's amazing. Maybe I could help you. We could be partners. Partners. 2 9-year-olds dream of building a better world together, while the adults in their lives scheme to tear them apart. Victoria followed his gaze toward the children, her expression softening slightly. For a moment, Richard thought she might understand, might remember what it felt like to be young and hopeful and full of dreams. Instead, she said, "You're thinking with your heart, Richard. That's always been your weakness." Her voice became gentle, almost maternal. "I understand. After Catherine left, you've been searching for something to fill that void. But this isn't the answer. This is how good men make terrible mistakes." She was right about one thing. Catherine's leaving had left a hole in his life that all his money couldn't fill. But was that what this was about? Was he projecting his loneliness onto his son's friendship? Or was he finally seeing clearly for the first time in years? Hey, beautiful people, I need to pause here for just a second, because this is getting intense. What would you do in Richard's position? Would you listen to Victoria's brutal business logic, or follow your heart? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this decision is about to change everything for Daniel, Sophia, and their families. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're as invested in this story as I am. We're about to reach the point of no return. Victoria checked her watch. The children have had their fun. Now be the father Daniel needs, not the father you think you want to be. End this before it becomes a problem we can't control. She was asking him to choose his carefully constructed world of wealth and influence and control, or the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of children who saw past all of that to something real. Richard looked through the doorway one more time. Daniel was showing Sophia how to fold paper airplanes. Both of them bent over the crisp, white paper with the intense concentration only children could manage. Sophia's tongue poked out slightly as she concentrated, her dark hands careful and precise as she followed Daniel's instructions. They looked like what they were, best friends sharing a perfect moment. In 2 hours, Richard was supposed to attend a charity gala where he'd write checks to organizations helping underprivileged children. He'd smile for photos, give a speech about social responsibility, and accept praise for his generous donations, all while destroying the childhood of the underprivileged child in his own home. The hypocrisy was staggering. Victoria was waiting for his answer, her phone still displaying Maria's financial information like a weapon ready to be deployed. One word from Richard, and Maria would lose everything. Sophia would lose her stability, her home, her chance at those big dreams she shared so freely. Daniel would lose the first real friend he'd ever had. But Richard would keep his empire intact. The choice should have been simple. Richard Sterling hadn't become a billionaire by prioritizing sentiment over strategy. He'd built his fortune by making hard decisions, by choosing logic over emotion, by understanding that sometimes people got hurt in service of the greater good. So why were his hands shaking? Through the doorway, Sophia suddenly looked up, her dark eyes meeting Richard through the crack in the door. For a moment, she just stared at him with the frank curiosity of childhood. Then she smiled. Not the practiced, careful smile adults wore around wealthy people, but the genuine, radiant smile of a child who still believed the world was fundamentally good. She waved at him. Richard's heart stopped. This little girl, who had every reason to be intimidated by him, who lived in a world where people like him held all the power, had just smiled and waved like he was a friend, like he was safe, like he was someone worth trusting. When was the last time anyone had looked at him that way? Richard. Victoria's voice cut through his thoughts. We need to handle this. Now. He turned to face his business partner, his oldest friend, the woman who'd helped him build everything he thought he wanted. And for the first time in 20 years, Richard Sterling knew exactly what he had to do. No. The word fell from Richard's lips like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everything Victoria thought she knew about him. Victoria blinked, clearly certain she'd misheard. I'm sorry. I said no. Richard's voice grew stronger, more certain. I'm not firing Maria. I'm not separating the children. And I'm not turning my son's first real friendship into a casualty of our paranoia. Victoria's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something Richard had never seen before: genuine shock. In 20 years of partnership, he had never, not once, directly contradicted her judgment on matters of social strategy. Richard, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. He moved away from the doorway, forcing Victoria to follow him down the hall. He couldn't bear the thought of the children overhearing what was about to happen. Do you know when I last heard my son laugh like that? This isn't about laughter, it's about 3 years ago. 3 years, Victoria. Richard's voice cracked slightly. My son is 9 years old. and I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen him genuinely happy. What does that make me? Victoria's expression hardened back into its familiar, ruthless lines. It makes you a responsible father preparing his child for reality. The world isn't fair, Richard. Daniel will inherit more wealth and power than most people can imagine, and with that comes responsibility. He can't afford to be naive about class differences. Naive. Richard's voice rose slightly. A 9-year-old girl looked at my son and saw a lonely boy who needed a friend. That's not naive. That's human. When did we decide being human was a liability? From the other room, the children's voices had grown quieter, more conspiratorial. Richard could hear them planning something, their excitement barely contained. The sound made his chest ache with a longing he'd forgotten he could feel. Victoria followed his gaze, her jaw tightening. Fine. Let's discuss the practical implications of your humanitarian impulse. She pulled out her phone again, scrolling through the dossier she compiled. Maria Dawson makes $38,000 a year from all her jobs combined. Her daughter attends Riverside Elementary. Test scores below state average. 40% of students qualify for free lunch. Is that really the environment you want influencing Daniel's development? The casual dismissal in Victoria's voice, the implication that Sophia was somehow less valuable because of her circumstances, ignited something dangerous in Richard's chest. Sophia is brilliant, he said quietly. In the past hour, I've watched her demonstrate more emotional intelligence, creativity, and natural leadership than most of the adults in our social circle possess. She's a child from an unstable background with no prospects. She's a child with unlimited potential who's been dealt a difficult hand. Richard stepped closer to Victoria, his voice dropping to the tone he used in hostile negotiations. And if you ever speak about her that way again, our conversation will be over. Victoria's eyes flashed with something between surprise and admiration. She'd always respected strength, even when it opposed her. All right, let's say you're serious about this friendship. What's your endgame, Richard? What happens when Sophia starts asking Daniel why he lives in a mansion while she shares a one-bedroom apartment? What happens when she wants him to visit her neighborhood, meet her friends? How do you explain to a 9-year-old why the world is so unfair? The questions hit their mark. Richard had been thinking with his heart, but Victoria was forcing him to think with his head. The reality was that Daniel and Sophia lived in fundamentally different worlds, and those differences would only become more apparent as they grew older. But before he could respond, Maria appeared at the end of the hallway. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her cleaning supplies. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly. "I've finished in the kitchen. Should I collect Sophia now?" The way she asked the question, with the resigned acceptance of someone who knew her fate was being decided by forces beyond her control, made Richard's decision crystal clear. "Actually, Maria, I was hoping we could talk." Richard ignored Victoria's sharp intake of breath. "Would you mind joining us in my study?" Maria's eyes widened in alarm. "Sir, if Sophia has done something wrong." "She hasn't done anything wrong. Neither have you." Richard glanced at Victoria, who was watching the exchange with barely concealed horror. "I think there are some things we need to discuss." The study was Richard's sanctuary, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk that had belonged to his grandfather, and walls lined with awards and photographs documenting his rise to power. It was a room designed to intimidate, to remind visitors of exactly who they were dealing with. But as Maria perched nervously on the edge of an antique chair worth more than her annual salary, Richard realized the room's opulence only highlighted the vast inequality that separated their worlds. Victoria settled into her usual chair beside Richard's desk, her posture radiating disapproval. She was clearly planning to treat this as a business meeting where Maria would be informed of decisions already made about her life. Richard had other plans. "Maria," he began, "I want to apologize." Both women looked startled, but for different reasons. Victoria looked like he'd announced his intention to give away his fortune, while Maria looked like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Sir, I should have known about Sophia weeks ago. I should have known that my son was lonely, that he needed what she's given him today." Richard leaned forward, trying to make himself less intimidating. "Instead, I've been so focused on preparing him for some distant future that I forgot to let him be a child." Maria's eyes filled with tears she was clearly trying not to shed. Master Daniel is a wonderful boy, sir. So polite, so smart. But today I saw him just being happy. Sophia has that effect on people. She does. Richard's voice was soft, and I don't want that to change. Victoria made a small sound of exasperation. Richard, surely you're not suggesting. I'm suggesting that we've been doing this all wrong. Richard turned to face Victoria fully. We've spent years building walls around Daniel, convinced we were protecting him. But we weren't protecting him. We were isolating him. Isolation is necessary when you have his kind of wealth and visibility. Victoria shot back. Every friend becomes a potential threat. Every relationship, a possible exploitation. You know this, Richard. We've seen what happens to wealthy families who aren't careful. She wasn't wrong. Richard had seen the headlines, the scandals, the way seemingly innocent childhood friendships have been weaponized by tabloids and opportunists. The fear was real, the danger legitimate. But so is the cost of that fear. Your comments are absolutely blowing me away right now. The way you're all invested in this family's journey is giving me chills. I'm seeing Team Victoria and Team Richard forming in the comments, and honestly, I can see both sides. What would you do if you were Maria right now? Would you fight for your daughter's friendship or accept whatever decision these powerful people make? Let me know below. Your insights always make these stories even more powerful. Maria, Richard said, making a decision that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. I have a proposition for you. Victoria went very still beside him. Sir, Maria's voice was barely a whisper. I want to offer you a position. Full-time household manager with benefits, a retirement plan, and a salary that's substantial. He paused, watching her face carefully. The position would come with a small apartment in the guest house. For you and Sophia. The silence that followed was deafening. Maria's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Victoria looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Richard, Victoria said slowly, do you understand what you're suggesting? He understood perfectly. He was suggesting something that would change everything, not just for Maria and Sophia, but for his own carefully constructed world. He was suggesting that his son's happiness might be worth more than social conventions and business strategies. I understand that my son has never been as happy as he was today, Richard said firmly. I understand that Sophia brought something into this house that all my money couldn't buy. And I understand that if I let fear make this decision for me, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Maria was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to find words. Sir, I don't know what to say. It's more than I ever dreamed of. Say yes, Richard said simply. Say yes, and let's figure out how to make this work. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is insanity, Richard. You're making a life-altering decision based on one afternoon of sentiment. Have you considered what the board will say? What will your investors think? What happens when this story inevitably gets out? Let it get out, Richard said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Let them write about the billionaire who hired a single mother and let his son have a real friend. Maybe it'll inspire other people to remember what actually matters. What actually matters, Victoria repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief, is protecting everything we've built. Everything your father built, and his father before him. You're gambling with generational wealth based on childhood laughter. Richard thought about his father, a man who died alone in this very house, surrounded by wealth, but isolated from genuine human connection. His grandfather had been the same, powerful, feared, and ultimately lonely. The sterling legacy was built on achievement and accumulation, but what had it actually given them? Money that bought everything except happiness. Power that commanded respect, but not love. Success that impressed everyone except the people who mattered most. From somewhere in the house, children's laughter echoed again, pure, joyful, and utterly without agenda. It was the sound of his son discovering what it meant to have a friend. The sound of Sophia finding a place where her dreams weren't dismissed as impossible. The sound of childhood as it was meant to be experienced. Victoria, Richard said quietly, I've spent 9 years trying to turn my son into someone worthy of our legacy. Today I realize our legacy isn't worthy of him. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Victoria stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been disappointment. "Fine," she said finally. "But when this blows up in your face, and it will, don't come to me for damage control." She gathered her purse and headed for the door, then paused. "You're choosing to be weak, Richard. I hope your son's friendship is worth everything you're about to lose." After Victoria left, the study felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight Richard hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. Maria was still crying, but now she was smiling too. "Sir, I promise you won't regret this. Sophia and I will work so hard." "I know you will," Richard said. "But Maria, you don't work for me anymore. You work with me. There's a difference." As they worked out the practical details, salary, benefits, living arrangements, Richard found himself thinking about the conversation he needed to have with Daniel. How did you explain to a 9-year-old that his life was about to change in ways that might be wonderful or terrible or both? How did you tell your son that you'd finally decided to choose love over fear? The answer came with another burst of laughter from the other room, followed by Sophia's voice. "Daniel, you're going to be the best big brother ever when you grow up." Big brother. Richard's chest tightened with unexpected emotion. Sophia saw Daniel not as an heir to billions, but as someone who would care for others. Someone who would use his advantages to lift people up rather than hold them down. Maybe she saw something in Daniel that Richard had missed. Maybe she saw the man his son could become if Richard stopped trying to shape him into someone else. As Maria hurried back to collect Sophia, her daughter who would soon be living under the same roof as Daniel, Richard realized that his carefully controlled world was about to become beautifully, chaotically unpredictable. And for the first time in years, that didn't terrify him. It thrilled him. The die is cast. Richard has made his choice, and the consequences are already starting to ripple outward. Victoria's warning about everything blowing up feels ominous, doesn't it? The midpoint revelation is coming, and I have a feeling everything we think we know about this situation is about to change dramatically. Ready for the bombshell? 3 hours later, Richard sat in his home office, staring at a photograph that had just shattered everything he thought he knew about his life. The children were in the garden now, Sophia having been officially introduced as their new neighbor. Their laughter drifted through the open windows as they planned elaborate adventures for tomorrow, and the next day, and all the days after that. Maria was in the kitchen with the head housekeeper, discussing her new responsibilities with barely contained joy. Everything should have felt perfect. Instead, Richard was holding a 20-year-old newspaper clipping that his private investigator had just delivered, and his hands were shaking. The headline read, "Local girl wins full scholarship to Princeton." The girl in the photograph was 18, radiant with hope and possibility, wearing a simple dress that had probably been her best outfit. She was shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit, a man Richard recognized as his own father. The girl was Maria Dawson. "Sir," his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Patterson from Investigations is here to see you." Richard's throat felt like sandpaper. "Send him in." James Patterson entered the study with the grim expression of a man delivering terrible news. He'd been Richard's private investigator for 15 years, handling everything from background checks to corporate espionage. He was thorough, discreet, and had never once delivered information that made Richard question everything he believed about himself. "Until today, Mr. Sterling," Patterson said carefully, "when you asked me to run a comprehensive background check on Maria Dawson, I assumed it was standard protocol for the household manager position." It was. Richard's voice sounded hollow even to himself. "What I found, it's complicated." Patterson sat down without being invited, which immediately told Richard how serious this was. Maria Dawson wasn't always Maria Dawson. Richard's blood turned to ice. 20 years ago, she was Maria Santos, valedictorian of Lincoln High School, full scholarship recipient to Princeton University, pre-law track. Patterson paused, watching Richard's face carefully. "The scholarship was funded by the Sterling Foundation. Your father personally awarded it to her." The room spun slightly. Richard remembered that scholarship, one of dozens his father had funded over the years as part of the Foundation's educational initiative. Richard had been away at college himself, more focused on spring break plans than philanthropy. "She graduated with honors," Patterson continued. "Top 5% of her class, law review, Internship offers from 3 major firms. He paused again, and then something happened. What? Richard's voice was barely a whisper. Patterson pulled out another photograph. This one from a law firm's website, circa 15 years ago. A young Maria Santos in a sharp suit, standing with other junior associates, her smile bright with professional ambition. She was working at Henderson, Brooks and Associates. A rising star, they called her. Youngest associate ever to be offered a partnership track. Patterson's expression grew darker, until she tried to blow the whistle on a major client. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. Henderson, Brooks and Associates. He knew that firm. Sterling Industries had been a client there for years. What client? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Sterling Industries. Patterson met his eyes directly. Maria discovered that Henderson was helping Sterling Industries hide environmental violations at the Riverside factory complex. Toxic waste being dumped in low-income neighborhoods. She tried to take it to the state attorney general. The Riverside factory. Richard remembered the scandal. Barely. It had been handled quietly, efficiently, with minimal media coverage. A few small fines, some regulatory changes, and life had gone on. He'd been so focused on other aspects of the business that he'd left the cleanup to his legal team. His legal team, led by Victoria Walsh. What happened to her case? Richard asked, though his churning stomach already knew. Destroyed. Maria was accused of stealing confidential client information, disbarred before she could practice law, and blacklisted from every major firm in the state. Patterson's voice was grim. She lost everything, Mr. Sterling. Her career, her reputation, her future. All because she tried to protect people who looked like her, live like she used to live. Richard stared at the photographs of Maria. First the hopeful scholarship recipient, then the promising young lawyer, and finally, nothing. No more professional photos, no more mentions in legal journals. Just a brilliant woman who disappeared from the legal world and eventually resurfaced as a cleaning lady. A cleaning lady in his home. There's more, Patterson said quietly. Are the neighborhoods affected by the dumping? Riverside, Oakwood, Pine Street. That's where Maria lives now. Where she's been raising Sophia. The irony was devastating. Maria had lost her career trying to protect communities from Sterling Industries' environmental crimes. And now she was living in one of those very communities, breathing the air and drinking the water that her younger self had tried to clean up. Sir, Patterson continued, I don't think this is a coincidence. I think Maria Dawson applied for the cleaning position specifically because it was your home. Richard's mind reeled. You think she's here for revenge? I think she's here for justice. The question is, what kind? Before Richard could respond, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the window again. Sophia and Daniel, playing in the garden, are completely unaware that their new friendship was built on a foundation of secrets and old wounds. Richard thought about the woman he'd just promoted to household manager, the woman he'd invited to live in his guest house with her daughter, Maria, who had every reason to hate everything the Sterling name represented. Maria, who had lost her entire future because of his company's crimes. Maria, who had somehow raised a daughter who looked at the world with hope instead of bitterness. Has she said anything? Done anything to suggest she wants to harm Daniel, or... No, sir. From everything I can tell, her only goal has been to provide for Sophia. She's worked 3 jobs for the past 5 years, never missed a payment on anything, never caused trouble. Patterson hesitated. But sir, there's something else you need to know. Richard wasn't sure he could handle any more revelations, but he nodded. Sophia doesn't know. About her mother's past, about the scholarship, about any of it. Maria has hidden it completely. As far as Sophia knows, her mother has always been a cleaning lady. The sacrifice embedded in that secret hit Richard like a physical blow. Maria had given up not just her career, but her daughter's knowledge of what she'd once been capable of achieving. Sophia didn't know that her mother had been brilliant enough for Princeton, driven enough to take on corporate giants, brave enough to sacrifice everything for what was right. She just knew that her mama worked hard and loved her fiercely. Richard's intercom buzzed again. Sir, Mrs. Walsh is here. She says it's urgent. Victoria. Had she discovered the truth about Maria? Is that why she'd been so determined to get rid of her this afternoon? Send her in, Richard said, his mind racing. Whatever Victoria knew, whatever she was planning, he needed to understand the full scope of what he was dealing with. Victoria swept into the room with her usual commanding presence, but Richard could see tension in her posture. She glanced at Patterson, clearly annoyed by his presence. "We need to talk," she said, privately. Richard nodded to Patterson, who gathered his files and left. The moment the door closed, Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "You have no idea what you've done," she said. "Enlighten me." Victoria began pacing, her carefully controlled exterior giving way to something almost frantic. "Maria Dawson isn't who you think she is, Richard. She's not some innocent single mother who stumbled into your life. I know exactly who she is," Richard said quietly. "The question is, how long have you known?" Victoria stopped pacing, her face going pale. "How long have I?" She stared at him for a moment, then laughed bitterly. "Oh, Richard, you still don't understand, do you? Then explain it to me." Victoria moved to the window, looking out at the children playing in the garden. "I've known who Maria Santos was from the moment she applied for the cleaning position. I'm the one who destroyed her career, Richard. I'm the one who made sure she could never practice law again." The confession hit Richard like a freight train. His oldest friend, his business partner, the woman he trusted more than anyone except his son, she had systematically destroyed an innocent woman's life. Why? The word came out as a whisper. Because she was going to cost us hundreds of millions of dollars in cleanup fees and lawsuits. Because she was young and idealistic and stupid enough to think she could take on Sterling Industries and win. Victoria's voice hardened. "Because that's what I do, Richard. I protect our interests. I always have." Richard thought about all the times Victoria had made problems disappear, all the obstacles she'd quietly removed from their path. He'd assumed it was just business acumen, strategic thinking. He'd never asked for details about how she handled things. He'd never wanted to know. So, when she applied to work here, he began. "I knew immediately, but I also knew she was desperate, that she'd take any job to feed her daughter. I thought it was poetic justice, the woman who tried to destroy us, reduced to cleaning our toilets." Victoria's smile was sharp and cold. "But I underestimated her. I thought 15 years of poverty would have broken her spirit. Instead, she's been planning." "Planning what?" Victoria turned back to face him. "Think about it, Richard. She gets a job in your home, gains access to your son, earns your trust. And then what? She reveals the truth about what Sterling Industries did to her, what you did to her. Suddenly you're not just the billionaire who befriended a poor child. You're the man whose company destroyed that child's mother's life." The scenario Victoria was painting was devastating in its implications. The media would crucify him. The board would demand his resignation. Daniel would grow up knowing that his father's wealth was built on the destruction of his best friend's family. But even as the political strategist in Richard's mind calculated the damage, another part of him was remembering the woman he'd spoken with earlier. The tears in Maria's eyes when he'd offered her the promotion. The genuine gratitude, the promised loyalty. Either she was an extraordinary actress, or Victoria was wrong about her motives. If that was her plan, Richard said slowly, "Why accept the promotion? Why move into the guest house? Why get closer to us?" "Because," Victoria said, "the closer she gets, the more it's going to hurt when the truth comes out." Outside, Sophia's laughter rang out again, followed by Daniel's delighted shrieks. They were playing some elaborate game that involved running and hiding and pretending to be superheroes. Their joy was so pure, so uncomplicated. Richard thought about the woman who had lost everything because she tried to protect communities like the one Sophia now lived in. He thought about the sacrifice she'd made, the secrets she'd kept, the daughter she'd raised to be hopeful despite having every reason to be bitter. And he made his decision. "Victoria," he said quietly, "I need you to leave." She blinked in surprise. "Richard, I mean permanently. Our partnership is over." The words fell into the room like stones, creating ripples that would reach far beyond this moment. Victoria stared at him as if he'd announced his intention to burn down the mansion. "You're choosing her over me," she said finally. "A woman who's probably planning to destroy everything we built. And you're choosing her over 20 years of friendship." "I'm choosing to be the man my son deserves as a father," Richard replied. "Something I should have done years ago." Victoria's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally a cold calculation that Richard recognized from hostile boardroom negotiations. "This conversation isn't over, Richard. When this blows up in your face, and it will, Remember that I tried to save you from yourself." After she left, Richard sat in the silence of his study, surrounded by awards and photographs that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. Everything he'd built, everything he'd achieved, was tainted by the knowledge of how it had been protected. Maria Santos had tried to do the right thing, and it had cost her everything. Now she was Maria Dawson, cleaning the home of the man whose company had destroyed her future, raising her daughter in the shadow of the very injustices she'd once fought against. And Richard had to decide, was she here for revenge, justice, or simply survival? The answer, he realized, mattered less than what he chose to do next. Outside, the children were calling for him to come play. 2 9-year-olds who saw the world as it could be, not as it was. Sophia, who didn't know her mother had once been destined for greatness. Daniel, who didn't know his father's wealth was built on choices that destroyed lives like theirs. Richard stood up, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the sound of their laughter. It was time to start building a different legacy. Whoa, everything just changed, didn't it? The revelation about Maria's true identity has flipped this entire story on its head. Victoria's gone, but her warnings are lingering. And now Richard has to decide whether to confront Maria about the past or find another way forward. Darkest hour is coming, and I have a feeling things are about to get much worse before they get better. Are you ready for the emotional devastation that's about to unfold? Richard woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of his phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. Half asleep, he fumbled for it, expecting some routine business emergency that could wait until morning. Instead, he found 17 missed calls from his head of security, 12 from his publicist, and 43 from numbers he didn't recognize. The first text message made his blood turn to ice. Check the news. Now, James Patterson. Richard's hands trembled as he opened his laptop. The headlines hit him like physical blows. Billionaire's dark secret. Sterling Industries destroyed whistleblower's life. Now she's living in his home. From Princeton Law to cleaning toilets. The woman who tried to stop Sterling Industries. Exclusive. Inside the twisted relationship between Richard Sterling and the maid he ruined. The articles were everywhere. Major newspapers, social media, financial blogs. Someone had leaked everything. Maria's real identity, her destroyed legal career, the environmental cover-up, even details about yesterday's events with the children. But the photos were what made Richard's chest constrict with panic. There, splashed across every major news outlet, were images of Daniel and Sophia playing in the garden. Someone had taken them from outside the estate's walls. Long-distance shots that showed 2 children laughing together, completely unaware that their friendship was about to become a national scandal. The headlines accompanying those photos were even worse. Sterling heir befriends daughter of woman his family destroyed. 9-year-old caught in billionaire's web of guilt and manipulation. Is this friendship real, or another Sterling Industries cover-up? Richard's phone rang again. This time, it was his head of security. "Sir, we have a situation. There are news vans at the front gate. Reporters are trying to scale the property walls. We've had to call in additional security." Richard moved to his bedroom window and peered through the curtains. Even in the pre-dawn darkness, he could see the glow of camera lights beyond the estate's gates. His private sanctuary had become a circus, and at the center of it were 2 innocent children whose only crime was becoming friends. "What about the guest house?" Richard asked, his stomach dropping. "Are Maria and Sophia safe?" That's another problem, sir. Mrs. Dawson left about an hour ago. She took her daughter with her." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. "Left? Where did they go?" "Unknown, sir. One of the night guards saw them leave through the service entrance. Mrs. Dawson was carrying suitcases. Maria was gone. She'd fled in the middle of the night, taking Sophia with her, leaving no word about where they were going or if they were safe." Richard thought about the reporters camped outside, the way they'd been hunting for this story. Had Maria and Sophia walked into that chaos? Were they somewhere out there, alone and frightened, being pursued by cameras and questions? "Sir," the security chief's voice brought him back to the moment. "There's something else. Mrs. Walsh has been giving interviews since midnight. She's saying a lot of things." Richard closed his eyes, knowing that whatever Victoria was saying would make everything infinitely worse. 20 minutes later, Richard sat in his study watching Victoria destroy his life on live television. She was on the morning news, perfectly composed in a tailored suit, speaking with the measured authority that had made her such an effective business partner and such a devastating enemy. Richard Sterling is a man who's lost perspective, Victoria was telling the interviewer. He's allowed his guilt over past business decisions to cloud his judgment. But using children, manipulating a friendship between his son and this woman's daughter, that's unconscionable. Are you suggesting that Mr. Sterling orchestrated this relationship? The reporter asked. I'm suggesting that Richard Sterling is a man desperate to rebuild his image, and he's using innocent children to do it. The timing is convenient, don't you think? Just as Sterling Industries faces new environmental lawsuits, suddenly he's befriending the daughter of a woman his company allegedly wronged years ago. Richard wanted to throw the laptop across the room. Victoria was spinning the narrative perfectly, making him sound like a manipulative monster who'd used Daniel and Sophia as pawns in some twisted public relations scheme. The worst part was how plausible it sounded. His phone buzzed with a text from Daniel's private school. Emergency meeting required. Multiple parents have expressed concerns. Please contact the administration immediately. Another text, this one from the Sterling Industries board secretary. Emergency board meeting called for 9 a.m. Attendance is mandatory. And another, from his publicist. Not taking your calls because I don't know how to fix this. Sorry, Richard. You're on your own. Richard was losing everything. His business relationships, his son's school, his public reputation. All because he'd chosen to let his son have a friend. But none of that mattered compared to the fear clawing at his chest about Daniel. His son was still asleep, blissfully unaware that when he woke up, his world would be irrevocably changed. How did you explain to a 9-year-old that his best friend was gone? That the adults in his life had secrets and histories that made their friendship impossible? That the media was calling their beautiful, innocent connection a manipulation? How did you tell your son that you'd failed him again? Richard's study door burst open without a knock, something that never happened. Mrs. Patterson, the head housekeeper, stood in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. Mr. Sterling, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent. Behind Mrs. Patterson stood a woman Richard barely recognized. Maria's hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes red from crying. She looked like she'd been driving all night, which she probably had. But she was alone. Where's Sophia? Richard asked immediately. Safe, Maria said, her voice hoarse. She's with my sister in Philadelphia. She doesn't know. She doesn't understand why we had to leave so suddenly. Maria stepped into the study, and Richard could see the devastating toll the past few hours had taken on her. This wasn't the composed cleaning lady or even the grateful woman who'd accepted his promotion yesterday. This was someone who'd been stripped of every defense, every carefully maintained facade. You knew, she said simply. You knew who I was. Richard nodded, not trusting his voice. For how long? Since yesterday. I had Patterson run a background check after you accepted the position. Maria's laugh was bitter and broken. A background check. Of course. She moved to the window, looking out at the media circus beyond the gates. 20 years I've been running from who I used to be. 20 years of telling myself that if I just kept my head down, worked hard, and stayed invisible, I could give Sophia a good life. She turned back to face him, and Richard saw something in her eyes that made his chest ache. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too much pain for too long. Do you know what it's like to have your daughter ask why other kids' moms have important jobs while hers cleans other people's houses? Do you know what it's like to bite your tongue when she talks about becoming a lawyer someday, knowing that you once almost made it there yourself? Maria, I used to be somebody, Mr. Sterling. I had a future, a purpose, a chance to make a difference. Your company took that away from me. Your partner made sure I could never practice law again. And now, she gestured toward the window, toward the cameras and reporters. Now the whole world knows that Maria Santos, the promising young lawyer, became Maria Dawson, the cleaning lady. They're going to dissect every choice I've made, every sacrifice, every moment of struggle. Richard wanted to apologize, to explain, to somehow make this right. But every word he could think of felt inadequate against the weight of what Maria had lost. Why did you come back? He asked quietly. Because Sophia is asking for Daniel. Because she doesn't understand why we had to leave her new best friend without saying goodbye. Because my 9-year-old daughter is crying herself to sleep in a strange bed, and I don't know how to explain any of this to her." The image of Sophia crying for Daniel hit Richard like a physical blow. Two children, separated by adult secrets and consequences they'd had no part in creating. "There's something else," Maria continued, her voice growing smaller. "The doctors at Philadelphia Children's Hospital want to run some tests on Sophia. She's been having headaches, nosebleeds. They think it might be related to environmental toxins." Richard's world stopped spinning. "The Riverside area," Maria said, answering his unspoken question. "Where we've been living for the past 5 years. Where Sterling Industries dumped chemicals 20 years ago. Where the cleanup was never really completed." The irony was devastating and perfect in its cruelty. Sophia, innocent, joyful Sophia who saw beauty in everything, might be sick because of toxins that Richard's company had hidden, that Maria had tried to expose, that Victoria had made sure never saw the light of day. "The doctors say early intervention is key," Maria continued. "But the treatments are expensive, and without insurance." She trailed off, then looked directly at Richard. "I didn't come here for money, Mr. Sterling. I came here because I needed you to know that your son's friend, the girl who made him laugh for the first time in years, might be dying because of what your company did to my neighborhood." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Richard thought about Sophia's bright smile, her infectious laughter, the way she'd waved at him through the doorway. This beautiful child who'd given Daniel the gift of friendship might be paying for Sterling Industries' crimes with her life. Outside, the media circus was growing larger. Richard's phone was buzzing constantly with calls from board members, investors, legal teams. His empire was crumbling, his reputation was in ruins, and his son was about to wake up to a world where his best friend was gone and might never come back. But all of that paled in comparison to the realization that was slowly destroying him from the inside. Everything Victoria had said about him was true. He was using Maria and Sophia's story to assuage his guilt. He was manipulating their friendship to make himself feel better about his company's crimes. He'd convinced himself he was being generous and open-minded, when really he was just another wealthy man trying to buy his way out of the consequences of his actions. "Maria," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm so sorry." She studied his face for a long moment, and Richard saw something shift in her expression. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the recognition of genuine remorse. "I know you are," she said quietly, "but sorry doesn't change what's already been done, and it doesn't fix what's happening to Sophia now." From upstairs came the sound of small feet running down the hallway. Daniel's voice called out, bright with excitement, "Sophia, are you here? I have the best idea for our adventure today." Richard and Maria looked at each other, both knowing that Daniel was about to discover that his first real friend was gone, that the perfect afternoon they'd shared yesterday was also their last, and neither of them knew how to protect a 9-year-old boy from the brutal reality that sometimes loving someone wasn't enough to keep them safe. "This is hitting me so hard right now, and I know it's hitting you too. The way everything is falling apart for all of them. Richard losing everything he built, Maria facing her worst fears, and those innocent children caught in the middle. Drop a heart in the comments if you're feeling this as much as I am. Sometimes the darkest hour really does feel hopeless, doesn't it?" Daniel appeared in the study doorway in his pajamas, his hair messy from sleep, his face bright with anticipation. When he saw Maria, his smile grew even wider. "Maria, where's Sophia? Is she still sleeping? Can I wake her up? We're going to build the biggest fort ever." Richard watched his son's innocent excitement and felt his heart break into a million pieces. The darkest hour had arrived, and he had no idea how any of them would survive it. "I'm barely holding it together after writing that. The way everything is collapsing at once. Victoria's betrayal, the media circus, Sophia's potential illness, and Daniel about to lose his best friend. This is the moment where everything feels impossible to fix. But remember, we still have 3 parts left, and something tells me that sometimes the deepest darkness comes right before the most beautiful dawn. The turning point is coming. Are you ready to see how they start fighting their way back?" Daniel's smile faltered as he looked between Richard and Maria, his 9-year-old intuition picking up on the tension that filled the room like smoke. "Where's Sophia?" he asked again, his voice smaller now, uncertain. Richard knelt down to his son's eye level, his heart breaking at the confusion and growing fear in Daniel's face. How did you explain the collapse of an entire world to a child who just discovered what friendship meant? Daniel, Richard began carefully. Sophia had to go stay with her aunt for a while. What? Daniel's eyes were wide, searching. Did I do something wrong? Did she not want to play with me anymore? No, son. You didn't do anything wrong. Sophia loves playing with you. Richard's voice cracked slightly. Sometimes adults make things complicated, and children have to deal with the consequences. Daniel processed this with the serious consideration only children could bring to adult failures. When is she coming back? The question hung in the air like a prayer. Richard looked at Maria, seeing his own heartbreak reflected in her eyes. How did you tell a child that sometimes people didn't come back? That the world was full of forces more powerful than friendship and love? I don't know, Richard said finally, the honesty burning his throat. Daniel's face crumpled. But we were going to build a fort today. We were going to be pirates and astronauts and save the world together. His voice broke on the last words, and Richard felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. This was what mattered. Not board meetings or stock prices or public relations disasters. This, his son's heartbreaking because his first real friend had been torn away by adult secrets and corporate machinations. Daniel, Richard said, standing up with sudden determination. What if I told you that we could try to bring Sophia back? Ow! Daniel's eyes filled with hope, so pure it made Richard's chest ache. Richard looked at Maria, seeing the exhaustion and fear in her face, but also something else. The fierce protectiveness of a mother who would do anything for her child. We tell the truth, Richard said simply. All of it. Maria's eyes widened. Mr. Sterling, you don't understand what that would mean for you, for your company. I understand perfectly. Richard moved to his desk, pulling out his phone. I understand that my company poisoned your neighborhood and destroyed your career. I understand that my business partner systematically ruined your life to protect our profits. I understand that I've spent 20 years building an empire on other people's suffering. He began scrolling through his contacts, looking for his lawyer's number. I also understand that none of that matters compared to getting Sophia the medical treatment she needs and giving our children back their friendship. Richard, Maria said carefully, if you go public with the truth about what Sterling Industries did, you could lose everything. I already lost everything that mattered, Richard replied, thinking about the years of distance between him and Daniel, the hollow achievements that had never brought real happiness. Yesterday, for the first time in my life, I saw what I could gain instead. Daniel was watching this exchange with the intensity children brought to adult conversations they only half understood but knew were important. Dad, are you going to fix it? The simple faith in his son's voice gave Richard the strength he needed. I'm going to try. Richard's first call was to his lawyer, not the corporate team that handled Sterling Industries affairs, but his personal attorney, a man who'd been telling him for years to consider philanthropy and social responsibility. Michael, it's Richard Sterling. I need you to draft a public statement and prepare for the biggest legal undertaking of your career. 20 minutes later, Richard sat at his computer, typing the words that would either destroy or redeem him. Maria stood behind him, reading over his shoulder, occasionally suggesting changes that made his confession more accurate, more complete. Daniel had curled up on the study couch with his favorite book, but Richard could see he wasn't reading. He was listening to every word, understanding more than any 9-year-old should have to understand about the complicated world adults had created. The statement began simply. My name is Richard Sterling, and I need to tell you about the worst mistake of my life. He wrote about the environmental cover-up, about Maria's destroyed career, about 20 years of willful blindness to the consequences of his company's actions. He wrote about children growing up in poisoned neighborhoods while he lived in a mansion built on their suffering. But he also wrote about Sophia and Daniel, about 2 children who had found in each other what he'd forgotten was possible, pure, uncomplicated love. I don't know if I can undo the damage my company has caused, the statement concluded, but I can stop pretending it didn't happen. I can stop letting other people pay the price for my success. And I can make sure that no child has to choose between having a friend and having justice. When he finished, Richard looked at Maria. This will trigger investigations, lawsuits, and probably criminal charges. Sterling Industries might not survive it. And you're willing to risk that? Maria asked. Richard thought about Victoria's warning, about everything he'd worked to build, about the empire his father and grandfather had created. Then he looked at Daniel, who was pretending to read, but was actually hanging on every word. "I've spent 9 years trying to prepare my son to inherit my legacy," Richard said. "Today I realized I should be preparing a legacy worthy of my son." But before Richard could publish the statement, his study door burst open again. This time it was his head of security, followed by 3 people Richard didn't recognize: a woman in a hospital coat, a man with a badge, and someone with a camera crew behind them. "Sir, I'm sorry," they insisted. "Mr. Sterling." The woman stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Elizabeth Chun from Philadelphia Children's Hospital. I believe you know Sophia Dawson." Richard's blood turned to ice. "Is she all right?" "She's stable, but we need to discuss her treatment options. The environmental toxin exposure has caused significant health issues that require immediate intervention." The man with the badge stepped forward. "I'm Detective Rodriguez with the EPA Criminal Investigation Division. We're reopening the investigation into Sterling Industries' activities in the Riverside area." And the person with the camera crew spoke last. "I'm Sarah Martinez from Channel 7 News. We understand you have a statement to make about your company's environmental crimes and their connection to this little girl's illness." Richard looked around his study, at the officials and reporters who'd invaded his sanctuary, at Maria's terrified face, at Daniel curled up on the couch watching his father's world explode in real time. This was the moment, the point of no return. He could retreat behind lawyers and public relations teams and damage control, try to minimize the fallout and protect what remained of his empire. Or he could do what Maria had tried to do 20 years ago: tell the truth, regardless of the consequences. Hey everyone, pause with me for just a second because this moment is everything. Richard is literally standing at the crossroads between saving his reputation and saving his soul. What would you do? Sometimes being brave means losing everything you thought you wanted to gain everything you actually need. If this is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me, let me know in the comments. Your support for these characters is giving me life right now. Richard stood up, straightened his shoulders, and looked directly into the news camera. "Yes," he said clearly. "I have a statement to make." Dr. Chin stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling, before you say anything, you should know that Sophia's condition is serious but treatable. With the right intervention, she can make a full recovery. But the treatment is experimental and expensive." "How expensive?" Richard asked. $2 million. Maybe more." Richard didn't hesitate. "Done. Whatever she needs, whatever it costs." "Sir," Detective Rodriguez interjected, "any financial assistance you provide could be seen as an attempt to influence our investigation." "I don't care how it looks," Richard said firmly. "A child is sick because of my company's crimes. I'm going to fix that first, and then I'm going to answer for everything we did." He turned to Maria, seeing tears streaming down her face. "Call your sister. Tell her to bring Sophia to whatever hospital Dr. Chin recommends. All expenses paid, best doctors in the country, whatever she needs." "Richard," Maria whispered, "I can't accept." "You're not accepting charity," Richard said gently. "You're accepting justice. Something that should have happened 20 years ago." He faced the camera again, and this time his voice was strong and clear. "My name is Richard Sterling. I need to tell you about a brave woman named Maria Santos who tried to stop my company from poisoning children, and how we destroyed her life for it. I need to tell you about her daughter Sophia, who's sick now because we never properly clean up her mess. And I need to tell you about my son Daniel, who learned what friendship means from a little girl whose mother we tried to silence." The words poured out of him. 20 years of buried guilt and hidden truths finally seeing sunlight. He told them about the cover-up, about Victoria's tactics, about his own willful blindness. He told them about Sophia's illness and his commitment to her treatment. But most importantly, he told them about the children. "My son and Sophia became friends because they saw what adults often forget, that what matters isn't what you have, but who you are. They don't care about money or status or the sins of their parents. They just care about each other." Richard's voice broke slightly. Yesterday, they were planning to build a fort together. Today, Sophia is in a hospital bed because of toxins my company released. If that's not a reason to change everything about how we do business, I don't know what is. When he finished, the room was silent except for the hum of camera equipment. Dr. Chun was the first to speak. "Mr. Sterling, if you're serious about funding Sophia's treatment, We need to move quickly. Every day we delay makes her recovery more difficult. I'm serious, Richard said. What do you need from me? As the adults began discussing medical logistics and legal procedures, Daniel finally spoke up from the couch. Dad, does this mean Sophia is going to be okay? Richard knelt down beside his son, taking his small hands in his own. I hope so, Daniel. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure she gets better. And then she can come home. Home. Daniel was calling the estate home for Sophia, as if he'd already decided she belonged here permanently. As if friendship was just that simple. I hope so, Richard repeated. But first, she needs to get well. Daniel nodded seriously, then surprised Richard with a question that cut straight to the heart of everything. Dad, are you going to jail? The question hung in the air like a sword. Richard looked at Detective Rodriguez, who was taking notes and probably had the power to arrest him within the hour. I might, Richard said honestly. What we did was wrong, and when you do wrong things, sometimes you have to pay for them. Daniel considered this with 9-year-old logic. But if you go to jail, who's going to make sure Sophia gets better? The doctors will take care of her, and Maria will be there. And Richard paused, realizing something that filled him with unexpected peace. And even if I can't be there, knowing that I did the right thing will make everything worth it. Daniel smiled, the same radiant smile he'd shared with Sophia just yesterday. Sophia told me that her mama always says being different isn't being less. Maybe being in trouble isn't being bad if you're in trouble for doing something good. The wisdom from the mouth of a child stopped everyone in the room. Here was a 9-year-old who understood something that had taken Richard 42 years to learn, that sometimes the right choice was also the hardest choice, and that was exactly what made it right. As officials made phone calls and arrangements, as his confession spread across news channels and social media, as his empire began its inevitable collapse, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years. Peace. He'd finally chosen love over fear, truth over comfort, his son's happiness over his own reputation. Whatever came next, he would face it knowing that he'd finally become the man Daniel deserved as a father. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to bring Sophia home. The turning point has arrived. Richard has chosen truth over everything else, and now Sophia has a real chance at recovery. But the story isn't over where we'll see the true cost and reward of Richard's choice. Are you ready for the big finale? 6 weeks later, Richard Sterling stood in a Philadelphia courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit, but his eyes were fixed on the gallery where Daniel sat beside Maria and a little girl with bright, clear eyes and a radiant smile. Sophia was alive. Sophia was healthy. Sophia was holding Daniel's hand and whispering something that made him giggle. The experimental treatment had worked. Dr. Chen's team had not only cleared the toxins from Sophia's system, but had pioneered a new therapy that could help hundreds of other children affected by environmental contamination. The Sterling Foundation, now completely restructured and under new management, was funding the treatment's expansion to communities across the country. But Richard barely heard the judge reading the charges against him. All he could see was his son's face, glowing with happiness as he leaned over to show Sophia something he'd drawn in his notebook. Mr. Sterling, the judge's voice cut through his reverie. Do you understand the charges against you? Yes, Your Honor, Richard replied, standing straighter. I understand completely. Conspiracy to cover up environmental crimes, obstruction of justice, corporate fraud. The charges carried a potential sentence of 15 years in federal prison. Richard had pleaded guilty to everything, but as he looked at Sophia's healthy, laughing face, 15 years felt like a small price to pay. Your Honor, Richard's lawyer began, my client has cooperated fully with the investigation. He's provided evidence that led to 17 additional arrests, including several high-ranking officials at Sterling Industries. He's also established a $2 billion fund for environmental cleanup and victim compensation. $2 billion. Nearly half of Richard's net worth, gone in a stroke of pen. The board had voted him out of Sterling Industries within a week of his confession. His mansion was being sold to pay legal fees and victim settlements. His empire was crumbling, and he'd never been happier. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, Mr. Sterling's actions have led to the largest environmental justice settlement in state history. His cooperation has made it possible to prosecute the real architects of this conspiracy. That was when the courtroom doors burst open. Victoria Walsh entered in handcuffs, flanked by federal marshals. Her perfectly composed facade finally cracked. Behind her came a parade of Sterling Industries executives, environmental officials, and corporate lawyers. The entire network of corruption that had protected the company's crimes for 2 decades. But Richard's attention was drawn to the woman walking behind the prosecutors, Maria Santos Dawson, wearing a sharp business suit and carrying a briefcase, her head held high with the confidence of someone who'd finally reclaimed her power. She'd been reinstated to the bar 2 weeks ago. The state attorney general had personally apologized for the injustice done to her, and 3 major law firms had offered her senior partnerships. But Maria had chosen something different. She'd started her own practice, specializing in environmental justice and corporate accountability. Her first case was representing the victims of Sterling Industries crimes, including herself. "Your Honor," the prosecutor announced, "the state would like to call Maria Santos Dawson to read a victim impact statement." Richard watched Maria walk to the podium, her steps sure and strong. The broken cleaning lady who'd cowered in his hallway 6 weeks ago was gone, replaced by the brilliant lawyer she'd always been meant to be. "Your Honor," Maria began, her voice clear and carrying. 20 years ago, Sterling Industries destroyed my career because I tried to protect communities like the one where I raised my daughter. They thought they had won. They thought they had silenced me forever." She turned to look directly at Richard, and he saw something in her eyes that took his breath away. Not hatred or anger, but something infinitely more powerful. Forgiveness. But they didn't understand something crucial. Maria continued. "Justice delayed is not justice denied. It's justice that grows stronger with time. Justice that teaches us the difference between what's legal and what's right." She pulled out a thick folder from her briefcase. "Today, on behalf of the 847 families affected by Sterling Industries' environmental crimes, I'm announcing the largest class action settlement in environmental justice history. But more than that, I'm announcing that my daughter Sophia, who nearly died from the toxins this company released, is alive, healthy, and teaching all of us what it means to forgive without forgetting." The courtroom erupted in applause. Richard felt tears streaming down his face as he watched Maria, brilliant, brave, unbroken Maria, finally getting the justice she'd fought for so long ago. But Maria wasn't finished. "Your Honor, I want to say something about Richard Sterling's sentence." She looked at Richard again, and this time her eyes were soft with understanding. "This man made terrible choices. He profited from a system that hurt people like me and my daughter. But he also did something that none of his co-conspirators had the courage to do. He told the truth, regardless of the cost to himself." She gestured toward Daniel and Sophia in the gallery. "My daughter is alive today because Richard Sterling chose his son's happiness over his own reputation. Because he chose justice over comfort. Because he finally understood that real wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the love we give and receive." Richard's lawyer leaned over and whispered, "She's arguing for leniency. She's trying to save you." But Richard was watching Daniel, who had stood up in the gallery and was holding Sophia's hand tightly. His son's eyes were bright with tears, but his chin was lifted with pride. Pride in his father. "Therefore," Maria continued, "while I believe Mr. Sterling must face consequences for his actions, I also believe that justice is best served when punishment leads to redemption. The man who covered up environmental crimes is not the same man who confessed everything to save my daughter's life." The judge listened carefully, then asked, "Mrs. Dawson, what sentence would you recommend for Mr. Sterling?" Maria was quiet for a long moment, looking at Richard with eyes that had seen the depths of human failure and the heights of human courage. "Community service, Your Honor. 2,000 hours working with environmental cleanup crews in the communities his company poisoned. Let him see firsthand what his choices cost, and let him be part of fixing it." The courtroom was silent as the judge considered. Richard could hear his own heartbeat, but more than that, he could hear Sophia whispering to Daniel, "Your daddy is a hero, you know? Heroes have to go through hard things before they get to save people. If you're crying right now, you're not alone. I'm barely holding it together writing this." The way Maria is choosing justice over revenge, the way she's protecting Richard even after everything he did to her, it's giving me chills. Drop a comment and tell me what you think the judge should decide. Sometimes the most powerful justice comes from the people who were hurt the most, doesn't it? Mr. Sterling, The judge said finally, "You have pleaded guilty to serious crimes that affected hundreds of families over 2 decades. Your actions cause immeasurable harm to communities and individuals, including the woman who just spoke on your behalf." Richard nodded, preparing himself for the worst. However, the judge continued, "Your cooperation with authorities, your complete confession, and your commitment to making amends demonstrate a level of accountability rarely seen in corporate crime cases. More importantly, the victim herself has requested leniency, and I believe Mrs. Dawson has earned the right to help determine what justice looks like in this case." The judge's gavel fell with finality. "Richard Sterling, you are sentenced to 5 years probation, 2,000 hours of community service in environmental restoration, and continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. You will also surrender your corporate assets to the Victim Compensation Fund and submit to regular monitoring by the Environmental Crimes Division." Richard's knees nearly buckled with relief. No prison time. He would be home with Daniel. He would be free to rebuild their relationship, to help with Sophia's continued recovery, to work alongside the communities he'd helped poison. But the biggest surprise came when Maria approached him after the sentencing. "Richard," she said quietly, "I have a proposition for you." "Anything," he replied, meaning it completely. "I'm starting a foundation, using part of the settlement money to help families affected by environmental crimes. I need someone who understands corporate structures, who has connections in the business world, who can help us fight companies that think they're too powerful to be held accountable." Richard stared at her, hardly believing what he was hearing. "You want me to work with you?" "I want you to work for me," Maria corrected with a small smile. "As my assistant. My very well-paid assistant. But still, you'd be answering to the woman whose life you helped destroy." The irony was perfect, beautiful, and exactly what Richard needed. "Maria," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "it would be an honor." That's when Daniel and Sophia came running over, their faces bright with excitement. "Dad!" Daniel threw his arms around Richard's waist. "Are you coming home now?" "I'm coming home," Richard confirmed, lifting his son into his arms. Sophia bounced on her toes beside them. "Mr. Richard, can Daniel come to my school's science fair next week? I'm building a water filtration system to help clean up polluted rivers." Richard looked at this remarkable little girl, the child who'd nearly died from his company's toxins, who'd received life-saving treatment funded by his confession, who was now dedicating her science project to solving the very problems his corporation had created. "Sophia," he said, kneeling down to her level, "Daniel and I wouldn't miss it for the world." As they walked out of the courthouse together, Richard, Daniel, Maria, and Sophia, reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed. But Richard barely noticed. He was too focused on the conversation happening beside him. "Daniel," Sophia was saying, "when we grow up, do you want to be environmental lawyers together? We can help make sure no kids get sick like I did." "Yes," Daniel replied immediately. "We'll be the best lawyer team ever." Richard exchanged a look with Maria, both of them thinking the same thing. These children had turned their parents' failures into their own future mission. They had taken pain and transformed it into purpose. 6 weeks ago, Richard had been a billionaire who had everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered. Today, he was a man with a criminal record, a ruined reputation, and a future that depended entirely on rebuilding trust one relationship at a time. He was also a man whose son looked at him with pride, whose son's best friend saw him as a hero, and whose son's best friend's mother trusted him enough to offer him a second chance. As they reached the courthouse steps, Sophia suddenly stopped and tugged on Richard's sleeve. "Mr. Richard," she said, her voice serious, "thank you for choosing to be good." The simple words hit Richard like a lightning bolt. Out of the mouths of babes came the truest summary of everything that had happened. He had chosen to be good, finally and completely, regardless of the cost. "Thank you, Sophia," he replied, "for showing me what good looks like." And as the four of them walked into the Philadelphia sunshine, a reformed billionaire, a vindicated lawyer, and 2 children who'd taught them all what really mattered, Richard Sterling finally understood what true wealth actually meant. It meant loving people enough to lose everything for them. It meant being brave enough to tell the truth when lies would be easier. It meant building a legacy not of what you accumulated, but of what you gave away. Most of all, it meant remembering that the most important empire anyone could build was the one that lived in the hearts of the people who loved them. 2 years later, Richard Sterling stood knee-deep in the Riverside Creek, wearing work boots and a t-shirt that read Environmental Justice Coalition, helping to plant native vegetation along the waterway that Sterling Industries had once poisoned. His hands were dirty, his back ached from hours of physical labor, and he'd never been happier in his life. "Dad, look," Daniel called from the creek bank, where he and Sophia were testing water samples with a portable chemistry kit. "The pH levels are almost back to normal." Sophia peered at the test strips, her dark eyes bright with scientific curiosity. "And look, there are tadpoles. That means the ecosystem is healing." Richard smiled, watching his son and Sophia work together with a focused intensity they brought to everything. At 11 years old, they become the unofficial junior scientists of the Restoration Project, documenting every sign of the creek's recovery with the dedication of seasoned researchers. They'd also become something else, living proof that friendship could survive anything the adult world threw at it. "Mr. Richard," a voice called from the trail above. Mrs. Henderson from the community center was walking toward them with a group of local children in tow. "Are you ready for the school group?" "Always," Richard replied, climbing out of the creek. This was his favorite part of his community service, explaining to local kids how environmental restoration worked, showing them that damaged ecosystems could heal with time and care. It was a lesson that applied to more than just waterways. As Richard began explaining watershed management to a dozen fascinated 8-year-olds, he caught sight of Maria walking down the trail in her business suit, having come straight from court. She'd just won another major environmental justice case, this one against a chemical company that had been dumping toxins in rural communities for decades. Maria Santos Dawson had become one of the most respected environmental lawyers in the country. Her practice had grown from a one-woman operation to a firm of 12 attorneys, all dedicated to fighting corporate environmental crimes. Time magazine had featured her on their cover 6 months ago under the headline, "The Lawyer Who Refused to Stay Silent." But Richard's favorite thing about Maria's success was simpler. She smiled now. The exhausted, fearful woman who'd cleaned his house had been replaced by someone who radiated confidence and purpose. She'd found her way back to who she was always meant to be. "How did the McKinsey Industries case go?" Richard asked as Maria approached. "Total victory," Maria replied with satisfaction. $50 million in damages, complete cleanup of the affected area, and new corporate oversight policies. "Oh, and their CEO is facing criminal charges." The children cheered. They'd been following Maria's cases with the same enthusiasm other kids brought to sports teams. To them, she wasn't just Sophia's mom. She was a real-life superhero who fought bad guys and won. "Speaking of victory," Maria continued, "I have some news. The EPA just approved our proposal for the National Environmental Justice Initiative. We're getting federal funding to expand the restoration program to 20 cities across the country." Richard felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with personal achievement and everything to do with being part of something bigger than himself. The work they'd started here in Riverside was spreading, helping communities that had been forgotten and ignored for decades. "And there's something else," Maria said, her voice growing softer. "The Riverside Community Council voted last night. They want to rename the creek." Richard raised an eyebrow. "What are they calling it?" "Hope Creek." Maria's smile was radiant. "Because they said what we've accomplished here proves that even the most damaged places can be healed if people are willing to do the work." Hope Creek. Richard looked at the waterway where native plants were thriving, where fish had returned, where children could play safely for the first time in 20 years. It was a perfect name for what had become not just an environmental restoration project, but a restoration of faith in the possibility of change. If this story is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me, I need you to know that you're part of this journey too. Your comments, your engagement, your hearts, you've been with us every step of the way. Before we finish this incredible story, tell me in the comments, what's one thing you would change about the world if you had Richard's second chance? And don't forget to subscribe because stories like this need to be shared, need to inspire real change. Now let's see how this beautiful journey ends. "Dad," Daniel said, approaching Sophia and their water samples, "we finished all the tests. Everything looks great." "Better than great," Sophia added. "The creek is actually cleaner now than it was before the pollution started. We made it better than it ever was." Richard knelt down to examine their data, marveling at how Sophia had transformed her illness into expertise. She'd become passionate about environmental science, reading every book she could find about ecosystem restoration and water quality management. Her bedroom walls were covered with charts tracking the creek's recovery, and she'd already announced her intention to study environmental engineering at MIT. You know what this means? Richard said, looking at their meticulous records. What? Both children asked simultaneously. It means our work here is complete. Hope Creek is officially restored. The children exchanged a look that Richard had learned to recognize over the past 2 years. The look that meant they were about to propose something ambitious and probably wonderful. Dad, Daniel said carefully, Sophia and I have been talking, and we have an idea. Oh no, Richard said with mock fear. Your ideas always involve me doing twice as much work. Sophia giggled. This one's different. We want to know if maybe we could adopt each other. Richard's breath caught. What do you mean? Like, officially become brother and sister, Daniel explained. Because that's what we are already, but we want it to be legal. Sophia nodded eagerly. Mama said she'd have to marry someone for me to get a new family, but we figured maybe there was another way. Richard looked at Maria, seeing his own surprise and emotion reflected in her eyes. The children had just casually suggested something that would formalize what had already become true. They were a family. That's a big decision, Maria said carefully. There would be legal papers and court dates, and you'd have to be sure, Richard added, because once you're family, you're stuck with each other forever. Daniel and Sophia looked at each other and burst into laughter. We've been stuck together for 2 years already, Sophia pointed out. We sleep in the same house, go to the same school, work on the same projects. We're already family. We just want everyone else to know it too. She was right. Somewhere in the chaos of the past 2 years, through court hearings and media attention, through Sophia's treatment and recovery, through Richard's community service and Maria's legal battles, they'd become something neither of them had expected. A family. Not the traditional kind with marriage certificates and romantic love, but something equally powerful. A chosen family built on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the unbreakable bonds forged by surviving a crisis together. Richard looked at Maria. What do you think? I think, Maria said slowly, that some of the best families are the ones that choose each other rather than the ones that just happen to each other. Is that a yes? Daniel asked hopefully. Maria knelt down to look both children in the eyes. Daniel, if we do this, you understand that Sophia and I come as a package deal? That you be gaining not just a sister, but a whole different way of thinking about the world. I want that, Daniel said seriously. Sophia makes me brave enough to care about things that matter. Maria turned to Sophia. And Sophia, you understand that being part of the Sterling family means dealing with a lot of complicated history? That there will always be people who remember what happened and judge us for it. I don't care what other people think, Sophia replied with the confidence that had carried her through illness and recovery. I care about what's true. And the truth is that Daniel is my best friend, and you and Mr. Richard work together to help people, and that makes us family. Richard felt tears threatening. Maria, if we do this, formally adopt each other's children, it would change everything. Legal responsibilities, inheritance issues, custody arrangements. Good, Maria said firmly. It's time those things reflected reality instead of hiding from it. 3 months later, Richard Sterling stood in the same Philadelphia courthouse where he'd been sentenced 2 years earlier. But this time, he was wearing a suit instead of an orange jumpsuit, and he was surrounded by friends instead of facing judgment. Daniel and Sophia sat in the front row, both of them in their best clothes, holding matching folders that contained their adoption portfolios, elaborate presentations they created to prove to the judge that they should be legally recognized as siblings. Behind them sat Dr. Chun, who'd flown in from the hospital to witness the proceeding. Mrs. Henderson from the community center was there, along with several families from the Riverside neighborhood who'd become like extended family over the past 2 years. Even James Patterson, Richard's former private investigator, had come to show his support. He'd left the corporate investigation business and now worked with Maria's law firm, using his skills to expose corporate environmental crimes instead of hiding them. Your Honor, the family court judge began. This is an unusual case. Joint adoption by unmarried co-parents, with biological children crossing family lines. Can you explain to me why this arrangement serves the best interests of the children. Richard and Maria had prepared for this question, but it was Sophia who spoke up from the gallery. Your Honor, can I say something? The judge smiled. Of course, Sophia. Sophia stood up with a serious dignity she brought to important moments. When I was really sick, Daniel's dad paid for my medicine, even though he didn't have to. When my mama needed help starting her law firm, Daniel helped her organize files and answer phones. When Daniel felt sad about all the mean things people said about his family, I helped him remember that what matters is who you choose to be, not who you used to be. She paused, looking directly at the judge. We take care of each other. That's what families do. We just want the law to notice what's already true. Daniel stood up beside her. And Your Honor, when people ask me if I'm sad that my dad isn't rich anymore, I tell them that before, he had money, but I didn't have a best friend. Now I have a best friend, and my dad has a purpose. That seems like a much better trade. The judge was quiet for a long moment, studying the paperwork, and then looking at the unusual family assembled before her. In my 30 years on the bench, she said finally, I've seen many families torn apart by secrets, greed, and the desire to protect reputation over relationships. This is the first time I've seen a family build stronger by choosing truth over comfort. She picked up her gavel. Joint adoption granted. Daniel Sterling Dawson and Sophia Dawson Sterling. You are now legally siblings. Richard Sterling and Maria Dawson. You are now the co-parents of two remarkable children. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Daniel and Sophia hugged each other with the joy of children who'd just had their deepest wish granted. Richard and Maria exchanged a look of profound gratitude. Not romantic love, but something equally powerful. The love of two people who'd saved each other's families by choosing to trust instead of fear. Later that evening, they celebrated at the community center in Riverside, surrounded by neighbors who'd become friends and friends who'd become family. The same room where Richard had once held press conferences about corporate achievements now hosted a potluck dinner, celebrating the simple miracle of love, choosing to expand rather than exclude. As the evening wound down, Richard found himself on the center's front porch with Maria, watching their children play in the yard that had once been contaminated soil, but was now a garden where Sophia grew vegetables for the community food bank. Do you ever miss it? Maria asked quietly. The money, the power, the certainty that you could fix any problem by writing a check. Richard considered the question seriously. I miss the feeling that I could protect Daniel from everything. But I don't miss believing that protection and isolation were the same thing. He gestured toward the children, who were now teaching some younger kids how to test soil pH with a chemistry kit. Look at him, Maria. He's confident, engaged, passionate about making the world better. The old Richard would have hired tutors to teach him chemistry. The new Richard gets to watch him discover that science is a tool for justice. Maria smiled. Sophia asked me yesterday if she should feel sorry for you, losing all that money and status. I told her that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is how you find everything you actually need. What did she say to that? She said that you reminded her of the butterflies we studied in science class. Sometimes you have to dissolve completely before you can become what you were always meant to be. Richard laughed, struck by the profound wisdom that seemed to flow naturally from both their children. A butterfly. I went from billionaire to butterfly. The best kind of transformation, Maria agreed. As they watched Daniel and Sophia organize the younger children into teams for their environmental science game, Richard realized that this was what happiness actually looked like. Not the hollow satisfaction of financial achievement or social status, but the deep contentment that came from building something meaningful with people you loved. Maria, he said quietly, thank you. For what? For showing me that some mistakes can become the foundation for something better. For teaching me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing what future you want to build. Maria was quiet for a moment, then said, Richard, can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Of course. When I lost my law career 20 years ago, I was so angry and bitter that I considered giving up on everything. I thought about moving somewhere far away, changing my name, starting over completely. She paused, watching Sophia explain something to a younger child with patient enthusiasm. But then I found out I was pregnant with Sophia, and suddenly I had someone to be strong for. Someone who needed me to believe that the world could be better than it was. She turned to look at Richard directly. Sophia saved me long before I ever saved you. She taught me that hope isn't naive. It's the most powerful force in the universe, because it's what makes people willing to do the hard work of change. Richard felt tears in his eyes as he understood what Maria was telling him. Both their children had been their salvation in different ways. Daniel had shown him what unconditional love looked like. Sophia had shown him what courage in the face of injustice could accomplish. Together, the children had taught their parents that the most important legacy anyone could leave wasn't wealth or power or status. It was the example of choosing love over fear, truth over comfort, and hope over cynicism, no matter how much it cost. As the evening stars appeared over Riverside, the same neighborhood that had once been written off as expendable, that was now thriving with clean water, healthy soil, and families who believed in their own power to create change, Richard Sterling finally understood what true wealth meant. It meant having people who loved you not for what you could give them, but for who you chose to be. It meant work that felt like purpose instead of obligation. It meant children who looked at you with pride instead of fear. It meant the knowledge that your choices had made the world a little bit better, a little bit more just a little bit more hopeful. Most of all, it meant understanding that the richest life wasn't the one where you had everything, but the one where you gave everything that mattered to the people and causes you loved. Beautiful souls, we've reached the end of this incredible journey together, and I'm honestly crying as I write these final words. Richard, Maria, Daniel, and Sophia have shown us that it's never too late to choose love over fear, that the most powerful families are the ones we choose, and that sometimes losing everything is how we find what we actually need. If this story touched your heart like it touched mine, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to remember that hope and healing are always possible. Thank you for being part of this family's story. You made it richer with every comment, every heart, every moment you chose to believe in the power of redemption. Until our next story together, remember, we all have the power to choose who we become. Choose love, choose the truth, choose hope, and never, ever give up on the possibility that tomorrow can be better than today. What an incredible journey this has been. From a billionaire's moment of recognition to a family forged by choice and strengthened by truth, this story has taken us through every emotion possible. Thank you for experiencing this transformation with Richard, Maria, Daniel, and Sophia. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us that it's never too late to choose love over fear, and that the richest life is one filled with people who matter more than possessions. Until next time, beautiful souls.